Before this video gets started, I just want to say you can skip ahead to the time on the screen if you want to just get to the meat of the video. But if you want to hear everything, tap into this. So originally this video was just going to be a development history on Type-0, but I decided that since I have a huge Final Fantasy 15 project in the works, I decided that maybe I should just do an entire series of the development history of the Fabula Nova Crystallis games and lead up to Final Fantasy 15. And I know Type-0 wasn't the first and it's kind of out of order, but I thought it would be fine if I started with this because I thought no one really talks about Type-0, and I just did a recent playthrough because Night Sky Prince inspired me to. And I thought, well, let's just do it. Let's do a Type-0 development video. No one talks about this game. I haven't seen a single video on the history of it. I know Final Fantasy Union has done some uploads of facts and stuff about it, about interviews and things, but I decided to just put everything into one concise video. So part 1 will be about, as you guessed it, Type-0. Part 2 will be Final Fantasy 13. And I have made a review on Final Fantasy 13, and I have the development history in that video. But I decided to do this one because I thought the 7 remake video was so well done and people liked it so much that maybe I should just do an entire Final Fantasy 13 one that's more in depth and goes over the history of what led to it, including some stuff I talked about before in the Final Fantasy 7 remake video. I just wanted to make a video as informative as possible on these 3 games, as I love the Fabula Nova Crystallis, even though it came out as a mess and was not the masterpiece it was intended to be. And I really love all the games in them to an extent. Some games are not as good as the others, but I had a good time, and I think I should share that joy with everybody on my YouTube channel. And I know Final Fantasy is not really that popular right now. More of my viewers are here for the Kingdom Hearts content, but I think that you guys would enjoy this too, as the Kingdom Hearts stuff is being heavily influenced by the remnants and leftovers of the Fabula Nova Crystallis. I wanted to talk about things that people don't really talk about, like Hajime Tabata's start and where he came from before Square Enix and stuff like that. So I really wanted to talk about that. I really want to get that in here. And since this was his main project, I thought it would be a great lead into the Final Fantasy 15 video, which, as you know, is a bit of a cobbled together mess of his ideas, Nomura's ideas, Nojima's ideas, and other people's stuff. And I thought it'd be fun if we could see the origins a little bit of where he came from. And it's not really the true origins, as Before Crisis is the main place where he started at Square Enix, but I didn't want to really talk about Before Crisis because I haven't played it, so I have no attachment to it. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. The year is 2003. Square and Enix have merged into a new company. With the new initiative to support multiple platforms and milk IPs, many devs would leave, but many would join. One of those who would join would be a man by the name of Hajime Tabata. Hajime Tabata grew up playing video games, but not loving Final Fantasy. He was more into games like Koei's war games, one of which would lead him to want to make games of his own. His love for war, history, and war games comes from his father being a history teacher. His dad would have war books and documentaries laying around the house. He hoped that one day, he'd be able to make a game similar to what's inside these. Before coming to Square Enix, he would work at many game companies, mainly working on stuff as an event director on projects that were in multiple genres: arcade games, action games, and RPG. Once he joined Square Enix, because of his experience as a director, he would be put onto the Final Fantasy team in a pretty high position. He would be named director for his first project, the mobile game Before Crisis Final Fantasy VII. Through the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, he'd form a relationship with Tetsuya Nomura, and they'd work on many projects together. As I stated, he wasn't a fan of Final Fantasy, but after working with Nomura on things like Before Crisis, Crisis Core, and the rest of the compilation, he'd come to love Final Fantasy because he would see the work that's put into making one. While he would work on Before Crisis and help Madhouse on Lost Order Final Fantasy VII anime OVA, Tetsuya Nomura and the rest of the crew were thinking up a plan. While they were finishing work on Kingdom Hearts 1 Final Mix and Final Fantasy X-2, the heads of the Final Fantasy brand, Shinji Hashimoto and Yoshinori Kitase, alongside Nomura, wanted to do something like the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, but from scratch. Something like a new myth of the crystals, one where every game would share the same lore and themes, the Fabula Nova Crystallis. The original vision was created by Tetsuya Nomura, alongside concepts and character designs, while Kazuhiko Nojima would head the lore and write the history and the Bible of the universe. Once he was done, he would have other team members give their input to expand on the legend and central themes, such as death and fate, among others. Those who would contribute would end up heading their own games in this new sub-franchise. Tetsuya Nomura, Otomo Toriyama, and Hajime Tabata. He decided to go with the Bible that he would share with everybody because he loved Greek and Norse mythology. They wanted to expand this as far as not even just this series of games, but maybe the future of Final Fantasy as a whole, as they thought it would help ease up development by letting everyone take from the same base. Tetsuya Nomura would use the mythos to tell a darker Final Fantasy story set in modern times, focusing on the human aspect of the myth. This project was Final Fantasy Versus 13. Otomo Toriyama wanted to focus on the gods and deities and how they affect people's lives, with his project, Final Fantasy 13. And Hajime Tabata would finally be able to tell his story of war, and the gods orchestrated the entire thing with his project, Final Fantasy Agito 13. At E3 2006, all three would be announced. Final Fantasy 13 would release on PS3, Agito would release on next generation phones, and Versus 13 would also be a PS3 game. It was on PS3 also because it was considered the shadow to 13's light. Versus in Latin means to change directions. All three will be made on the proprietary engine Crystal Tools, or as it was called at the time, the White Engine. An engine for all needs in the company. I want to save the Crystal Tools fiasco for the Final Fantasy 13 and the Final Fantasy 15 videos, so I will keep it short here. But basically, everyone was working on assets and things without it since the R&D engine team wasn't done, and when it was, it blew up everything. Thankfully, in the case of Type-0, the dev teams were working on Before Crisis, Crisis Core, and the Third Birthday, so they had an engine ready to go. Secretly in the background, this team was also working on a PSP version that they decided they wouldn't announce until the mobile version was almost done. They had to wait for the next generation of mobile devices, as I said, that would be closer in power to a PlayStation Portable, to make it an experience that was up to the standards of a mainline Final Fantasy. With the development starting, Hajime Tabata was finally able to create the story of war that he had longed for all these years. He would assemble a lot of people who he had already had a working relationship with to help him craft his game. At the start, he would write the initial scenario. The rest would be filled out by Hiroki Chiba and Sara Okabe. Hiroki Chiba had worked at Square Enix since 1994, as an event director and planner. He would finally get his chance to do scenario with Dirge Service Final Fantasy VII, so he had already worked alongside Hajime Tabata on projects before the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. This would be Sara Okabe's first work at Square Enix, and she would continue to stay there after this. She would also work on stuff like the manga and the side story, The Ice Reaper, for Final Fantasy Type-0. The overall theme of the game spawned from the idea that Tabata wanted to make a game with a player fighting beside characters born into a cruel world torn by conflict. He wanted a game that depicted life and death, and the value of life in a more mature and earnest way than they had done before. To capture the feeling of danger and fragility of life, both the game and the combat would emphasize this fragility. Initially, Tabata had forgotten to add the Fabula Nova elements, minus the ending, but along with Nomura and Chiba, they were able to work them in a way that didn't disrupt the scenario Tabata had laid out. For the art, Yusuke Noura of Final Fantasy VII, VIII, and X fame would come back as the art director, with the co-director and Yusuke Nakai. Nomura, Roberto, and Nakai will work on the characters and monsters of the world. To get a sense of the gritty war-torn world, Noura would look through history books and even take trips to Japanese special forces training camps to get an understanding of how cadets work and contribute to the military, and he would use that information for the story. He would design the Four Kingdoms and the island of Vermilion Persilium, where the Crystal for Shizuku was set. He based it on an offshore island that he visited a long time ago. He added stuff to the story based on things he saw there, such as a dead cat being surrounded by other cats, and that gave him the idea of a way to portray the bond between Class 0. As for the characters, from the start, it was planned to have 13 playable ones, so Nomura wanted to come up with 13 names that would fit well together. He decided on playing cards because the name Joker sounded fascinating to him. Unfortunately, that was the only one to not make the cut. Alongside Class 0, Rhyme and Machina were created. Together, Nomura and Tabata would design them all, and give them each unique attributes, trying hard to make sure none of them were similar looking to each other. They wrote down each character's personality traits, strengths, weaknesses, and faults, and decided how that would be expressed in the game. Because they all had to be main characters in a sense, Tabata didn't worry about how they were developed narrative-wise, and thought those aspects they would go into would be enough for them to stand out. Roberto Ferrari and Nakai would focus on the rest of the cast. Major NPCs such as Arcia, Kurosame, and Sid, among others, will be handled by Roberto, while Nakai would do many of the minor. Roberto and Naora would base these NPCs on real-life influences, such as the Nazi Party and the Thule Society for Sid and the Byakuya Militants Empire. For the gameplay side of things, they would have many people join. Kenichiro Yuji as battle director, Taisuke Oe as lead character designer, Jun Kato as lead enemy designer, Toru Osanai and Masayasu Nishida as level directors, and Takasugu Nakazawa as the lead game designer. The goal of the combat was to have the characters' individualities shown through their abilities. Because of the large cast and unique aspects, they made it so it wasn't too complex to play. However, they still wanted it to be hard and brutal for the realism Tabata was aiming for. We've really tried to focus on the true nature of battle, what a realistic type of magic versus weaponry battle might unfold like. If you're hit by fire, you burn. If you're cut, you bleed. It's approaching those realistic types of expressions within the Final Fantasy world's atmosphere. It's more of a realistic blow versus just scraping away with a little HP. One thing they could not do as well as they wanted was the multiplayer due to the limitations of the devices they were being developed for. Takasugu would incorporate the Phantoma system, as he wanted to do something similar to what the draw system was like in Final Fantasy VIII, absorbing the life essence of enemies and turning it into magic. For music and sound, Takeharu Ishimoto would join as the composer. His goal for the soundtrack was to aim for something that would give the feelings of war, love, life, and death. He'd create a group at Square Enix called Team Zero to write lyrics for vocal pieces such as the beginning of the end. He'd then have them translated into Latin by Dr. Robert Zielinski. Arrangements for the orchestral themes that played throughout were done by Kentaro Sato, while others were arranged by Reiko Mikoshiba. While this was considered a spin-off game, they wanted to treat it on the level of a mainline Final Fantasy. To do this, they would record as much as possible for live orchestra. They had them performed at the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and the Cotillion Chamber Choir, while the recording and mixing of these tracks was done at the Sydney Opera House. The recording for the rest was done at Ishimoto's studio. With the team assembled, things were put into motion. However, the team had to put the game on low priority in 2007, as the third birthday needed to be finished alongside final touches on Crisis Core. It was a lot of work to be done, to the point that Tabata thought they'd have to cancel Type-0. Thankfully, Hexadrive came in and helped them work on the third birthday and get it out on time. A year later, in 2008, they were finally able to go into full production. At the Square Enix party DK Sigma 3713 2008, they would reveal that the game was coming to PSP and the mobile phone version was cancelled, as they did not have time to wait for the next generation of phones to be on par with the PlayStation Portable. This would mean that Tabata's MMO aspect would not be able to be done because the PSP was not able to handle the connectivity issues that they assumed the next generation of phones would be able to. They were also not able to implement a day-night cycle, a calendar system linked to the real world, and a story influenced by players' votes, due to time and hardware constraints. Around 2009, internally, they decided to change the name from Agito 13 to distance itself from Final Fantasy XIII, and allow it to have room to become its own sub-series if they found the time. One name they suggested was Final Fantasy Live because of the multiplayer aspect, that would still be retained, despite not having the full scale they initially wanted. While in the middle of full production, they realized they needed a theme song and aimed to give Bumpa Chicken for it. Bumpa Chicken would agree right away, as they were big fans of the franchise. It would be shown in development stuff for the game as inspiration. They were able to do whatever they wanted for the most part, but Tabata had one request. He suggested the theme song for Centuries of Picture is Paris Burning by Takashi Kato as inspiration for their song, which he would also have the rest of the team watch to understand what type of game he was going for. At the request of the band leader Motu Fujiwara, they would go for different instrumental renditions of Zero throughout the game, as a lead up to the end of the game where the full song plays. While they weren't able to do everything Tabata wanted multiplayer wise, he would get some aspects in there, like have it so that you can have ghosts of people join you in multiplayer missions and do co-op in a way. However, because of the AI aspect that they wanted to do, they would have to nerf the single player AI. to the point that it would mostly only heal the player in critical condition. The summon system they wanted to implement at first was not controllable. They were going to have an AI control, but the team did not feel it was as powerful as it should have been. Tabata would try giving the monster the ability to be controlled by the player, and when they did that, they felt that it was perfect and as feral as they wanted it to be. They tried to overcome the tech limitations of the PSP to make it happen, which they did.
彼らは自らの運命を
自分たちで決めた。
そう、死ぬことを恐れずに。
死に直面する恐怖を知らずに。
In January 2011, at the Square Enix first production department premiere event, they would reveal the name change and final look at the game. A lot has changed since 2008. A lot grittier looking, more blood, and felt like the war Tabata was aiming for. The game would be released that year on 2 UMDs due to the size of the game. It would be pricey too, but Tabata said it made sense considering what they were aiming for. Despite the price, it was a success. There were some issues people had, such as Japanese players finding the game hard to understand because of the set difficulty that they were aiming for, and that complaint would be heard by the team. Overall though, in other aspects the game was very well liked. Dengeki, PlayStation, and Famitsu rate the game 39 out of 40 and 9.25 out of 10 respectively, with Famitsu going as far as to say, it vividly portrays the fact that this is a deep, intensive Final Fantasy experience, something beyond just a side story. English fans will want to get a taste of this so-called loved Final Fantasy spin-off, Final Fantasy Type-0. That would not happen in an official capacity, however, because of the lowering popularity of the PSP in the West, according to Tabata. But he said he wanted to make it happen eventually in some way. It had come out from Kotaku that Square had shelved a near-complete localization that was almost done, including an English script and voice recording work, in 2012. In 2011, Truth the Key would release an English menu patch, allowing people to have some access to the game that they would be chomping at the bits for. It would be a while before a full translation came along. Another group would come along in 2012 to do that translation. Skyblade Cloud and his team of translators and programmers announced in mid-2012 that they would be working on a full English patch. Internally, their aim would be August 2014. But even then, the team thought that wouldn't be enough time. Square Enix would learn about them working on this English patch and reach out to Sky and have a conversation with them about how to go about this patch release, as they wanted to deal with this without taking legal action. The rest of the team speculated that Square was reaching out because they had a big announcement to make, the localization of Final Fantasy Type-0. They talked about how they would proceed if Square did announce a Western release of Type-0 and discussed the possibility of not releasing the patch at all, to avoid potentially hurting sales, if that was indeed their E3 2014 announcement. This would occur in early 2014. The day before E3 2014, and before even the team knew, Sky would tweet that the fan translation was going to be dropped the next day, on June 9th, 2014. His reasoning was that he wanted everyone to see the work the team had done, but the team was not happy. Not only were they mad at the fact that they might have hurt their relationship with Square Enix because Square Enix might have announced the game the next day, they didn't think it would be ready until August at the earliest. The next day, Square would indeed announce Type-0 HD, and also ask Sky to take down the patch. One of the team members, Adam, had this to say about the entire debacle to Kotaku. The patch was far from ready, and we still had some videos to translate and some more text to proofread. We also hadn't fully played the game through after all our updates for bug testing. That day, Sky didn't log into Skype, answer emails, or answer tweets from us until about 8 PM. After that, Core, Merkaba, and I gave Sky a piece of our minds. Sky accused us of holding the translation hostage, and that he thought it was good enough back in February. He really had low expectations of us. Eventually, team members quit, and Sky was basically left alone. Many of the team members suspected that he somehow found out that their announcement was going to be Final Fantasy Type-0 HD, and decided to release it early so that he could get the drop on them. However, Sky says it wasn't that, and in fact, he thinks Square Enix announced the game because of his patch. A year later, in 2015, an updated version by Paizo Sparker, former member of Cloud's team, Colonel Panic, and Blackfire would release a new version of the patch, which included unofficial compatibility with the PS3, further translation fixes, and bug fixes. Type-0 HD would be our way of officially getting Type-0 in English and other languages. In mid-2012, the development team of Type-0 would move on to help with Final Fantasy Versus 13, which had been renamed 15 internally. As they were getting used to the development environment of the PS4, Tabata enjoyed it so much he wanted to bring Type-0 to it. The original plan was to have it on current-gen consoles at the time and the next generation of consoles also to reach the widest possible audience. But around December 2013, it was decided to focus on the next-gen platforms only. By that time, Square had taken note that the PlayStation 4 wasn't going to be as big of a seller as they thought. Part of the plan was to release the game on it to encourage people to buy it. Another reason was the team had never used the PS3 or worked around its dev kits. Square considered a Vita version, but Tabata had realized that Type-0 was a game that was really meant to be on a bigger screen and thought that it would be better to focus on that for an upgraded version. At the time, PC was off the table as Square as a company did not see PC as a viable platform, but Tabata was interested and wanted to consider it. While the goal was just to make a version that was nicer and could be localized, they took advantage of this to fix some issues Japanese players had with the game. Cameras, how summons worked, and difficulty among other things. They would also remove a lot of the multiplayer aspects. The game would be developed with Hexadrive for support, who helped them make The Third Birthday, as most of the team was working on Final Fantasy XV. They would use most of the assets from the PSP version with better textures, but would use higher quality CG models for the main characters. They would also change how the game looked color-wise, as they found it hard to see on a bigger screen, and use the gold because Yusuke Noura's new logo color was gold for the HD version. They would bundle the game with a demo of Final Fantasy XV to gain more hype for both releases. The HD version will release on March 7th, 2015, to a much more mixed reception than the initial Japanese release. Most disliked the obnoxious motion blur, inconsistent visuals, alongside some aspects brought over from the PSP, such as how menus work, the strategy RPG elements, and some higher difficulty spikes. Many would still enjoy the story and combat. The sales would be good for the game as it sold 1 million worldwide as of October 2015. The story would not end there though, as in 2014, Type-0 would get a sequel on phones, Final Fantasy Agito. It would use many of the original aspects Tabata wanted, but could not, such as character choices, multiplayer aspects, and a calendar system, while having a much lighter tone, but still incorporating serious moments. It was going to get a Vita version called Agito Plus, but it was cancelled. This game was shut down on November 30th, 2015. While this would be the end of Type-0, for many people, Tabata felt like he wanted to make a new game. In Type-0 HD, he would include a teaser in the secret ending for Final Fantasy Type Next, seemingly based on Japanese mythology and the Sengoku era. He would state that after Final Fantasy XV, my next game I want to make is Final Fantasy Type Next. Unfortunately, he would never be able to do so. That is the development story of Final Fantasy Type-0. Nowadays, it feels like this game has been forgotten. While it was once one of the most hyped up Final Fantasy games, it seems now no one remembers it. To me, it feels like if the HD version had come out more polished, it would have been remembered more fondly. Now, I just see people say, wasn't that the game that came with the Final Fantasy XV demo? It feels like it never truly got what it deserved. No sequels for HD consoles like it should have been. And not being able to be continued as a sub-series. I really do miss this game. I really enjoyed my time with it on this replay. And I wish it got the sub-series it deserved. I hope you guys have a great day. And peace from Crazy Games, everybody.